Imagine watching a series set in a bland and undefined world where your canvas is purely blank. The characters within it could be interesting, they could be, but the story wouldn't be nearly as immersive or even captivating for that matter. But with a well-developed world, you, the audience, can fully immerse yourselves in the story and become invested in these characters and their surroundings. If you're not yet familiar with the term world building, it's the process of creating a detailed and consistent setting for a story in a fictional series. But why is it so important? Well, world building is like the glue that holds everything together. It gives the characters a place to live, work, and play. It gives the story a sense of depth and realism, and it allows the audience to fully immerse themselves in the world you would have created. But world building isn't just for fantasy and or fictional stories. It's important for all types of media, from mystery to romance to drama, pretty much everything. And even a story set in the real world needs world building to create a sense of place and atmosphere. So how do you go about world building? Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all process, but there are a few key elements to consider. Obviously, geography is going to play a huge part, the cultural background, history, and politics. Think about the physical layout of your world, the different cultures and societies that exist within it, the events that have shaped it in the past, and the power dynamics at play. These all play a factor into how we as creators forge these stories in all different forms of media into account. But at the end of the day, you need to remember, world building is a creative and fun process. Don't be afraid to get creative and let your imagination run wild. Think about all the different worlds you've read and or watched about or seen in movies, games, or just whatever. I guarantee whilst you try and approach the correct way of tackling world building, you still need a sense of creativity. So with all things in hand, this is what world building is to, I guess, say the least, from some of your favorite series. I wanted to take a gander at this kind of thing again because to me, world building is the key essential to whether or not I can fall in love with this series or not. A world is what I see as the grounded foundation of a series, and when you start one, it's important to know that you don't need to fully explain what you're getting into right away. But I mean, I guess it's not a bad thing either. Throughout the catalog of media, being either teased or even just flat out getting thrown into the world is a dope way to get started with your world. You might not have noticed before, but there are a few of your favorite series that just do exactly that. One of the key examples of this technique is just what to name a few, but I mean, Hunter x Hunter is a big one, which takes place in a world with its own set of rules and societies, where the protagonist Gon is introduced to the world of hunters and their various abilities. You, the watcher and I guess or reader, is not given much background information about the world and its set rules, and must learn about them as the protagonist naturally does as the story continues. Similarly, Fullmetal Alchemist is set in a world where alchemy is a common practice, but the audience is not given much information about this, and I guess the history and the laws of alchemy, they kind of must learn about them as the series goes on. Game of Thrones, with its iconic intro sequence that gives you the rundown on the layout of the world and the territories that reside within it and the Seven Kingdoms. This way of expanding on the land from really early on is a perfect example of letting the audience know what to expect with what you are getting into. Granted, they don't need to tell you everything, otherwise what would be the point? But it's a little nice touch to throw in when getting into world building from the jump. However, just as interesting as this concept is, there is another way to tackle this approach. In world building, one more approach is to let a world stay a mystery and reveal it over time. This method is used in quite literally kind of all of my favorite series, so I see it as my personal favorite trope. For one, The Promised Neverland and Attack on Titan. Unlike most series, it tosses you into something that gives the audience a sense of being boxed in. What I mean by being boxed in is essentially giving practically little to no information on where the story is going to go, even from the beginning. This tends to leave people, including myself, on edge because of how much mystery and a sense of something being off has to offer. And in a way, it makes you keep coming back for more until you get the answers you deserve. Such as the enigma of what outside both of the walls in both of the respective series have to offer. With From Software games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, the same rules apply. The only difference is, the power is in your hands on whether or not you have the ambition to find out more about the story as you play the games. The world is shrouded in mystery and is not fully explained to the player, and the player must explore the world and discover information about it through dialogue with NPCs, item descriptions, and environmental storytelling. This approach allows the player to piece together the history and lore of the world on their own, rather than having everything spelled out for them. Letting the world stay a mystery and building it over time is again my personal favorite method of world building, as it keeps the readers and players engaged and allows for more of a natural and organic revelation of the world over time. And since we talked about both ways of introducing a world, what next? Well, as most of these tropes are insanely popular, these two do kind of merge together as a story advances, and I think that's just how things should be. With a successful and great overall world, you're kind of spoon-fed this information as time tells, at least in most stories. What I mean by this is that no matter if a story is throwing you into a world or rather keeping it a mystery, over time you're going to naturally be given this information that you need to express the foundation of a world. In a game like Hollow Knight, you're given the routes needed to follow to learn more about what the story is trying to tell you. All the more it builds upon the world in the meantime, essentially killing two birds with one stone. And even a Will-O-Vid soundtrack in some way gives you that sense of life as one does as you continue to explore the world of the game. In many ways, shape, and form, playing a game where you, the player, are given the motive to not only give life to his surroundings, but being the one to cause such an effect is what I mean by giving that world a sense of life. And The Legend of Zelda is another prime example, and to some it might make a little more sense, but essentially in most of its games, you're put through some grueling tasks to utilize how you can move in the game. This can lead to any puzzle you need to operate in sequence to progress in the game, or rather any boss you need to defeat in order to find out more on the world itself, and or any quest you need to complete throughout the game. These are all great ways of expanding on your world, but when it comes down to the divine details, there are a few series that stick out from the rest. I'm talking about the more engaging specifics and how in-depth a series can really be taken to. Radiant, a French published manga that's still currently ongoing, takes how in-depth in design a world can be, truly advancing its artwork and beauty of the manga to a whole nother level. It's the small things that count for me, and I think when it comes to Radiant, where its story may be generic at times, its visual presentation stands above the rest. It's able to push past the limits on what a fantasy world should really look like, and from time to time, be a little extra with its detail. But when you ask me, that's the best part about it all. And it's almost like there's never a ceiling to how creative this series can be from a visual standpoint, frankly surpassing the limits of how in-depth you really should be going on the topic of world building. One Piece, of course, to no surprise, is praised for exactly just that, never knowing when to stop, and that's more than okay for me, because in One Piece, when expanding on your world, it follows with the flow of your story's path, and an elongated route is just what the consumers of the series are looking for. There's always something more to the world of One Piece, not just with every arc, but within every new episode and chapter. These days, it feels as if Ichiro Oda, the creator of the manga, has something new in store to expand on his world with every single one. Building his world over a period of time gave Oda that leisure to have his pieces set on the board, and now pretty much everything in the world of One Piece has a story of its own to be told. And any character or island has a name in which sometimes intertwines, and characters you thought never interacted with each other actually have a whole backstory behind them. It gives the story the feeling of humanity, making the outlook on the setting become more and more real as time moves forward. One more to add would be Made in Abyss, because in Made in Abyss, it's set with its world right in front of you, and characters telling you about the depth and tragedy that lies the further and further you go down the rabbit hole. What I really like about how they set up their world is how it gives you your own perspective in the series. The world is mapped out and it prepares you for what's to come with each level of the Abyss, but you still get the feeling like the unexpected is to occur. And even with all the research they have built up in their own world, there is still always something more to offer when it's the protagonist's time to have fun and explore the Abyss. It's mysterious, but at the same time very melodic, and it seeks for further adventure to explore and give you the idea with an already established world. The audience has a way to further expand from that of their own perspective. In a way, it's your take on expanding on that of an already established world. On the other hand, world building tackles subjects that don't just matter in a fictional presence, but issues in current real-world scenarios that have an effect on today's society. Things such as politics, culture, society, discrimination, and the elements of humanity. For more of a manga like Berserk, where its style is a lot more naturalistic, it's easier to come by these kinds of emotions because of its art style. Even though it's set in a dark fantasy world, you get a taste of each of these real-world scenarios. The political system as showcased in the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc is one of the takes step aside from our main story to learn more about the world and how things tend to operate in its setting. Not to mention, but the arc doesn't strain away from our main cast long enough to the point of overdoing the subject. And even when we do regain attention to the Black Swordsman party, It still follows along their journey while it's showing off new locations in different areas, either showing the lowest of the low or the most fantasy-like scenery you can get out of a series. Funnily enough, the name of the arc is based on the Millennium Falcon from, of course, Star Wars, where the franchise is most notably known for its hierarchy of political understanding, so I do think that was genius on Miura's behalf. Not only for his story, but for his love of Star Wars. And the humanity of Berserk is without a shadow of doubt the most real thing about the series, because of its connection it has to the readers, especially in the Golden Age arc during the Eclipse. One Piece, however, is another great example, just on the other side of the same coin. Two anime and/or manga series that express two completely different styles of building a world, but can get across the same message. And I think One Piece can go down in just pretty much anything, like as I mentioned before, with its in-depth world-building structure, but in terms of its take on the subject of humanity's realism, One Piece does it in a way where it's fit for all ages. Throughout the series, we've seen how corrupt the government can be, the discrimination between different races such as the fishmen and any non-celestial, and of course the humanity we get from certain characters in tragic situations and scenes. All the time it's expressed in One Piece. While the series is a fun pirate series adventuring to find the One Piece, it's also a series that gears its way across the fundamentals of humanity, but doing it in a way where both your 10-year-old self and now your current self can understand the severity of the series just from a different perspective in your life. Unless you're still 10 years old, then maybe wait a few years to understand what I mean. But from a position of giving characters a place to live, work, and play, to creating a sense of depth and realism in the story, world building is the glue that holds everything together. So whether you're working on a fantasy, fictional, or real-world story, don't be afraid to get creative and let your imagination run wild as you build your own unique and captivating world. It's important to remember that world building is a creative and fun process, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to it. Creators should feel free to let their imagination run wild and come up with unique and imaginative worlds that are both captivating and believable. The goal is to create a world that feels lived in and authentic, and that the audience can fully immerse themselves in. World building is a crucial aspect of storytelling that can greatly enhance the immersion and engagement of the audience. From establishing a rich and detailed environment for the characters to inhabit, to creating a sense of atmosphere and realism. World building is a crucial part of the creative process of storytelling, and that's why it's so damn important.